If you thought the Carrington event of 1859 was the worst natural event that could come to our power grid, you got another thing coming. We have discovered there are natural events that are far worse. In fact, there's these events, we call them Miyake events now, or prior to that, we knew them as the Charlemagne events. These events apparently happen seeming like once every 1,000 years, but that's not exact because these were discovered by Fushia Miyake, if I'm saying his name right, a Japanese scientist, in 2012. And what we discovered was that in 774 AD, there was a huge spike in carbon-14 in the records of tree rings. And, there was some other evidence for this that is way off the charts from what you would get from a typical coronal mass ejection. Now, what happens is that radiation from space turns nitrogen in the upper atmosphere to radioactive carbon-14. Eventually, it decays back into nitrogen, or so I'm told. So what happens is that when you have a coronal mass ejection, you get more of this. Now, there's some of this going on all the time. There's kind of a background level. In fact, they can trace the 11-year solar cycle, more or less, by the amount of carbon-14 they find at various times. They find this in tree rings and other things. They also know the decay rate, so they can time all this stuff. So all that said, what they discovered is that these events can last more than a year. And what they discovered also is that they can be up to, in the Charlemagne event, Miyake event of 774 AD, was apparently 80 times more intense than the Carrington event. And nobody had power grids, nobody had telegraph stations. Technology was pretty primitive. Europe was in the middle of a dark age, so reporting was not all that great. So apparently they had some spectacular auroras, and they said ooh and ah, and went about their business, thankfully. Today, it would be a totally different matter. We would lose our entire electronic and electrical infrastructure. We'd lose our power grid, and it'd be generations before we ever crawl back out of this hole, and we'd have a lot less people. It would be catastrophic to beyond all dreams. And when you face this to the fact that, they're now figuring this as a 1% per decade probability of an event like this. But they figure there's a 14% per decade probability of a Carrington event. Now, with Earth's magnetic field drop-in, it may be something more like even a railroad event, like in 1921, could take a grid up. Maybe even a Quebec event of 1989, Quebec hydro event. Might even take down our entire power grid. It took down the power grid of Quebec back then, but Earth had a stronger magnetic field. Our shields are dropping. So our power grid is at grave risk. And then you add, so we're talking at least a 15% probability per decade. That's approaching playing Russian roulette every decade. Okay, if you live to be 80 years old, and your chances 1 per 6 per decade. You go through 8 decades, it's almost a near probability, not absolute probability, but almost a near probability that your kids are going to see this happen if we don't do something. This is why I've been actively promoting power grid defense. This placard back here is from the 2 conferences I chaired for power grid defense, and I'm an active member of 2 national level power grid defense committees. One founded by none less than Dr. Peter Vincent Priam, his Alabama State Director. So, I say the organization's the one he started. The EMP Task Force on National Homeland Security. So, guys, we're up against the power companies, and they've just spent more money on K Street lawyers to lobby against getting the power grid hardened. And it would have cost them to have done the job. So we got a problem, Houston. We've got to push this hard now because there's so many things that can take our grid down. It is beyond the pale. It is beyond the pale. And what I worry about most of all is our nuclear reactors, especially the spent fuel rod pools. We've got to do things to secure these, to make sure they got backup power. And quite frankly, we need to harden the grid. But the more I'm thinking about it, I think the more we need to shut the grid down and go off grid. You know, all these companies don't want to harden grid. Let them lose their market. Take it away from them. Say, okay, you don't want to play ball. You don't do your thing that you need to do to secure our country. Well, guess what? Bye-bye. We need to go microgrids, smaller grids, home grids. If you look at my universal habitat concept, you don't need anything from outside. You don't need any outside power. You might want internet. You don't need outside water, power, sewage, nada. You know, you can have a car if you want it, but if you probably need that, everything you need, you're going to grow and produce in your home almost. A lot more than what we do today. 3D printers and at-home food production system that I've come up with. No, you're not going to need so much, not nearly as much brought in. So, you know, small communities could take care of a whole lot of their needs amongst each other. So that's how we need to go. We need to change our system, and all these, and we need to decentralize massively. And yeah, these power companies aren't like about all these long rail lines, although they don't fail, but they'll conduct the electricity. Pipelines will conduct the electricity. That could be a danger. But in times of war and the times we're looking at coming ahead, pipelines, rail lines, power lines, they're all bridges, highways, water lines. They're all immensely vulnerable to attack. You can't even defend them. So it's nuts to be so dependent for your critical life systems on all these long range distributed systems, centralizing everything into nodes in the system. Don't work. It needs to go bye-bye. But we do need to harden our power grid. In the meantime, we need to safeguard our satellites. I assume we're still going to have satellites, we're still going to have communications, but we need to and we're still going to have factories, there'll still be power plants, but we need to dramatically scope that down, dramatically decentralize, and going off grid as much as possible, and reducing our reliance on these systems, reducing our reliance on everything centralized, including governments. That's right, the opposite direction where the guys like Klaus Schwab. Well, that was good for you one. I think I'm gonna stick with that. Klaus Schwab. Yeah, the algorithms may not know what I'm talking about. Klaus Schwab. Yeah, that's a good one. Bing, sticks. Klaus Schwab. I'm staying with it. Maybe the algorithms won't even trip on that. Not for a while. Good code word. It just slipped to me. Thank you, Freud. You dirtbag, Freud. He was a dirty old man. But anyway, so the fortuitous Freudian slip. So, guys, we need to think about this. You know, to go further on these things, I'm gonna give you some years that we know we had these Milwaukee events. And in the last, they went back and looked at this stuff for the last 10,000 years. So, of course, there was the 774 AD, the Charlemagne event, but we find there was one in 993 and 663. Now, guys, from 663 to 993, that's 300 years. That's not 1 in 100 years. That's really powerful. But they also have, but there's gaps. So you get a lot of them, and there's gaps. And sometimes apparently they come close to each other, like 500 and let's see, 5,259 BC, 5,410 BC, 5410 BC. Now, see, those are less than 200 years apart. And there was another in 7,176 BC. So apparently these things can come spaced within a few hundred years of each other. Now, some analysts think that these are solar flares that just keep, instead of just sending out onesie twosies, they just keep firing for a year like crazy. They don't coincide necessarily with solar maximum, solar minimum, and some people think you'd see more carbon-14 in the tree rings in the polar regions and what we're seeing for to comport with solar flare. But they don't know of any other thing that comes close to this other than solar flares, coronal mass ejections. So there's a little stumped as to what the actual cause is. I mean, the predominant old wisdom on it was coronal mass ejections, but it's being questioned by some of the physicists now. They're not sure. What is it? Is there some other cosmic event that occurs in our neighborhood of space that we're not aware of that generates these things? Oh yeah, if you're living in space, you want to have spacecraft that are very heavily shielded, armored, and habitats that have a lot of earth shielding. If you look at Gerard Kill and those concepts, it covers that. Absolutely. You could still live in space if you follow the kind of things he taught in his writings and books, because he was taking the radiation into account. Space, living in space, you should prepare like you're living in a nuclear reactor. and that's just it. But and there still can be big rewards for that. But here on Earth, we also need to take some of that into account, because we might be in a nuclear war, and that may be our biggest threat yet. We are intentions like never before. It is off the charts, and I may go live tonight. We need to talk a little bit about Russia and Great Britain. Yeah. So there's some real tense things there, very tense. So guys, prepare, get ready. Like I'm saying, these things apparently go on for up to a year or more. It's been said they can exceed a year, these Miyake events. And that is pretty frightening. That's way beyond what happened in the Charlemagne event. So we don't know what caused it. Well, we know what it would do. It would fry our infrastructure. Guys, I've talked about this in many of my videos. What would happen if we have a CME or an EMP, how those big 200 to 400 ton transformers would be fried. And for all those people who think that you're protecting your home with some little device that protects you from something coming on the power line, well, the EMP, and especially the worst part is what comes up from the ground, the ground line. Also, that's true of CMEs apparently too, in the right type. So, guys, we have a lot of preparations that we got to get ready, but we need to really rethink how we live. For the solar events, we might have time to restructure our society. For the events of the Passion of Man and the current events of the war, I don't know, guys. That could be right now. It could be weeks, months from now that we may find ourselves in a nuclear war. So for that, we can't get a grid hardened fast enough. We drug our feet. If we'd have started it back when I was beating the drums on it, when I was running my power grid defense conferences, or when the reports first came out of the EMP Congressional Task Force, some 14, 15 years ago, we'd be in good shape today. No, nothing happened. Except a lot of K Street lawyers made a lot of money in their pockets running down the halls of Congress. So that's, oh yeah, that was paid for by your rate paying money. When you pay your utility bills, that's what you were paying for. Instead of giving you security, you pay for them to hire a bunch of lawyers to run down the streets, hallways in Congress and to the agencies, lobbying for why you don't need to be protected. Well, them lawyers got it. So if that don't frost your cereal, I don't know what does. Don't frost your Frosty Flakes. Yeah. Well, I'm being facetious there. And there's other things. There's gamma ray bursts that you got to be concerned with, guys. We don't know if anything's about to hit us, but wait, we just got the results of what we see the biggest explosion we've ever witnessed. And that occurred 2 billion years ago, and we're seeing some effects of it here. A gamma ray burst is nasty. If we got hit by one of those, we'd be in trouble. But I don't think we need to worry about that right now. That's all I got to say on that topic, guys. So I'm practically done here. What I want you to think right now is get yourself ready. Be prepared for the hard times. I've got a whole playlist on nuclear survival. I'm going to put one of the videos right here. You need to check out this video and this playlist it's in, because we're coming to those kind of times, and not enough of you watch these videos. You really need to pay attention to these, because they go into great detail of the nature of the threat, the radiation, and the things you can do to safeguard yourself and your family. So that's what you need to do, my friends. Anyway, God, pray, prep and pray. That's the last thing I got to say. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for watching, and Greg out.